Good morning, everyone. Welcome to everyone here and everybody online as well. We are going to start with a scripture reading. We're going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes, since we're in a series of the book of Ecclesiastes. So in the Old Testament, we're going to look at chapter 2 and the first 3 verses. So Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. I said to myself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly. My mind still guided me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. So you might have heard of Aesop's fables. No? There's still some yes? There's some yeses, some no's. So they're essentially children's stories, little fables that you tell children to teach them the morals of life in some way or fashion. So I'm going to say a really kind of, or tell you a very short version of one of them. It's the Grasshopper and the Ant. So a grasshopper spends his summer singing and dancing, just having a great time. While a team of ants have worked hard all summer, collecting food for the winter. And this grasshopper doesn't understand why the ants are working so hard. The day's nice, it's fun, it's sunny, why not have a good time while it's still here? I think we can relate to that, living in Canada. It's nice in the summertime, you just want to have fun. So, the ants work hard, the grasshopper has fun and just kind of plays around. And then when the winter comes, the grasshopper finds himself hungry, dying of hunger, wondering what he has to eat. And he looks over and he sees the ants serving up food, the food that they worked hard for all summer. So again, very short version of that little fable, but it teaches the moral that there's time to have fun, but that cannot be all you do. There's more to life than just having fun. You got to work hard as well. So, kind of makes me wonder if Aesop read Ecclesiastes, because it kind of talks about that meaning of life and what you do with your life and the things that you spend your time on. Many think fun is the meaning of life. Search for fun, enjoyment. That's what life's all about. It's just having a good time and being happy. But there is more to that. Aesop is kind of stressing how work is also important. And if you look we are going to look in Ecclesiastes and see how fun and work, there's actually more to that as well. That you can't just spend all your time on work also, like the ant. You got to be like kind of both the ant and the grasshopper, but also neither the grasshopper and the ant as well. There's a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. She said, "The purpose of life is to live it, to taste experience to the utmost, to reach out eagerly and without fear for newer and richer experience." So again, that kind of is like that idea of searching for fun. Searching for experience is what the meaning of life is all about. And again, that makes sense. There's nothing really wrong with that at all. If you want to search and experience new things and have fun, that's definitely okay. But there is a bit of a limit to it. Having that sense of adventure and trying new things and enjoying yourself certainly isn't a bad thing, depending on what you're choosing to do. If you're having fun at the expense of other people, most people would say that's probably not a good thing. That's not what the meaning of life should be all about. So you have to start asking yourself, how far do you go with this idea of basing your life purely on fun and enjoyment and experiencing new things? You might put that limit of having fun as long as you're not hurting other people, then that's okay. And I think a lot of people believe that as well. Live life to its fullest as long as you're not harming anybody else. You can do whatever you want, I guess, to yourself, in a sense. And that's what it actually ends up being. It starts turning into that. If you're living just simply for fun, that kind of dopamine rush in your brain, you might start going down those paths of alcoholism and drug use, because that's what that's all about, is kind of releasing those happy chemicals in your head. And again, you're living for fun, but is that what life is all about? It's just simply doing drugs and getting hammered all the time? Probably not. Most people would probably say no. So there is some sort of limit on this thing of having fun, treating enjoyment and experience as the meaning of life and as your sole source of meaning in life and searching for that meaning in life. So Ecclesiastes touches on this as well. In our last lesson, we looked how the preacher, who we determined is Solomon, or most of the evidence points to Solomon being the author of this, began his search for the meaning of life. He observed the futility seen in the cycles of life and nature, about how the world continues to keep going, the generations pass away, generations are forgotten, generations live, they forget what happened behind them, and these things just keep going on, and he sees kind of a futility in them. His search then began with human wisdom, the search for knowledge, things of this world, trying to find out what this world is all about, philosophy, science, all of those sorts of things. And he used his God-given gift of wisdom, because God granted him a wisdom, to search these things out, to try to gain that human wisdom. And what his conclusion was, in searching for human wisdom, is grasping for the wind. That's a phrase that you see a lot in Ecclesiastes, kind of the futility of all this. Depending on your version, vanity and meaninglessness are also kind of through this whole book. And basing your whole life on only learning about the things of the world does not provide a fulfilled life. Again, that's another thing that people sometimes base their life on, is just being professional students in a sense of learning all the things about this world, philosophy, science, all that sort of stuff. And he determined that that, again, is not the basis of life. And he starts to continue his search as well. So that's what we're going to do today, is look at chapter 2. He's going to start looking elsewhere, and he's going to explore the value of pleasure, just having a good time. Again, in your version, it might have mirth as a word. I don't think that's a word that I've ever used really in real life. But we kind of know what it means, that search for pleasure, just enjoyment. And he also looks into the idea of the acquisition of wealth and great accomplishments as well. So that really goes back to that quote by Eleanor Roosevelt. The purpose of life is to live it, to taste experience to the utmost, to reach out without fear to newer and richer experience, kind of searching for those new things. And that's what Solomon did, the teacher that we see in Ecclesiastes. He's looking out for pleasure and seeing if that's what the meaning of life is all about, and also the acquisition of wealth and building things, trying to kind of build an empire or a legacy for himself as well. So we're going to go through chapter 2 and see what he has to say about this. So we'll look at the first 2 verses again. It's part of our scripture reading. The preacher or the teacher, again, in your version, it'll either say the preacher or the teacher, so I'll use those interchangeably. He tested this idea of pleasure and having fun, like the grasshopper. So Ecclesiastes 2, verses 1 and 2. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? So this is what he found. This idea of mirth or pleasure is vanity. It's meaningless. It's kind of useless in a sense. We'll see again what he concludes with this as well as we go through the chapter. I think it's interesting. He says laughter is madness. I'm not sure that's kind of an interesting to think of, but that's what he finds. He finds laughter is just being madness, and this idea of pleasure accomplishing little, if anything, in life. So searching for just pleasure in this life is meaningless. That's what he found. And really in these first 2 verses, that's kind of the summary of the chapter, and he expands on these thoughts as we keep reading on. So we look at verse 3 of Ecclesiastes 2. I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly. My mind still guided me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. So I like in this verse, he explains that he's still being guided with wisdom. And with this wisdom, he's experimenting with wine and pleasure, folly. Again, kind of like the grasshopper, just kind of enjoying things, doing whatever he wanted to do. And with that wisdom he had, he's doing it to the best extent possible, kind of better than anybody could ever do. And he's looking to see how to live your life on this earth. In the last part of the verse, he said, I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. So again, summing up essentially the whole book, that search for meaning. What do we do with these days that we have on this earth? So we go to verses 4 to 6, and this is where he's going to live more like the ant. Ecclesiastes 2, verses 4 to 6. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. So Solomon built many things. He really expanded the kingdom of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. He built great structures, the temple that's talked about in the Old Testament as being this magnificent structure. He talks about his own house, aqueducts, all of these major building projects that he undertook. If we look at verses 7 and 8, he also acquired whatever he wanted. Again, if you look in the Old Testament of how rich Solomon was, it's kind of crazy how much wealth he had. So Ecclesiastes 2, verses 7 and 8. I bought male and female slaves, and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers, and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. So again, living like the grasshopper, just kind of living it up. Had lots of wealth, had all those pleasures that are all around him. The delights of a man's heart. I don't want to get into that, but that's him having a lot of fun when he was on this earth. So he experimented with all these things. We go to verses 9 and 10. This is kind of interesting too, where he became great and he actually seems to be happy. So Ecclesiastes 2 verses 9 and 10. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. So his heart took delight in all of his labor. So he was enjoying himself. It was fun, and that's something that we cannot deny. If you're having fun, if you're getting that dopamine release in your brain, you are having fun. You're taking delight. It's a good time. But the thing that he recognized that's really interesting to note is in the last part of that verse, or that sentence, where he says, and this was the reward for all my toil. He recognizes that this is what he's getting from this. He's having a good time, but that delight is the reward. That's it. That's all that you get. So his conclusion is in verse 11. He's going to look back at this and come up with a conclusion of this. Ecclesiastes 2, verse 11. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. So he's concluding here that was simply delight truly enough to satisfy? Was kind of that enjoyment of the moment enough to justify all of this? And he's saying no. He concluded that all was vanity and grasping for the wind in some versions. Other versions, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So nothing was gained under the sun. He recognizes that delight is as far as it goes. When you experience that moment, that's the moment, you enjoy it, but that's all you're going to get out of it when you base your whole life on achievements and just having pleasure. So it's kind of interesting, this conclusion that he draws, and it might even seem a little bit strange when he admits that he finds delight, but that's meaningless. It's almost a little bit of a contradiction in a sense. But we'll keep going on and we'll start to understand why he says this. So if we look at verses 12 to verse 14. So Ecclesiastes 2, starting in verse 12. Then I turned my thoughts to wisdom, or to consider wisdom, and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom was better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. So one thing that he recognizes, again, back in chapter 1, he's really searching for knowledge, this idea of human wisdom, really understanding the world that's around him. And he recognizes that this search for knowledge is better than just simply searching for pleasure and partying it up. He says, I saw that wisdom is better than folly. He looks for human wisdom, the first chapter, he looks for pleasure and enjoyment, the second chapter. And he finds that the wisdom search is better than the folly, but they're both kind of senseless in a sense. And it makes sense. I like how he sums it up. He says in verse 14, it says, the wise have eyes in their head while the fool walks in the darkness. At least the wise guy knows where he's going. He's got a little bit of knowledge to understand what's going on. But they're both useless. The same fate undertakes them both. We keep reading, verse 15. It says, then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not long be remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. So he's starting to look beyond the immediate future. Again, that idea of searching for pleasure is a relatively immediate thing. You're kind of getting that pleasure right at the moment, and that's all you get. And then he starts looking beyond that, and he recognizes that the wise man and the fool are both going to die. If you're searching for human knowledge, that's one thing, and it's a little bit better than just searching for pleasure, but you're both going to die. The same fate awaits them both. So when we die, then eventually we're forgotten as well. This kind of gets back to chapter 1 as well, where he's talking about the generations coming and going, and everybody's going to be forgotten eventually. Somebody who partied really hard, you might remember, oh, Billy, you remember him? He partied real hard. You might talk about that. But as the generations go, you're going to forget about him. The famous philosopher, you might remember a little bit longer. We remember Plato and Aristotle and all those guys that are really thinking a lot about this human knowledge thing. But again, those guys are going to pass away as the generations go. these people are going to be forgotten, and he recognizes this. He sees that as generations pass, the same fate awaits them both. They're both going to die. They're both going to be forgotten in the end. So if you go to verse 17, this is kind of a interesting thing that he says in the start of this one as well. Ecclesiastes 2 and verse 17. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Again, not a very cheerful verse, in a sense. But he recognizes that it is meaningless. He started searching for the things on this earth without God in his life, and he recognizes that this stuff is all meaningless. Like, whatever you do here isn't going to really count for much. It might count for some generations as we go, some time after you pass on, but eventually those things are going to be forgotten. And it's one of those things that many in life, as you live your life, you might recognize this as well and have a little bit of sadness about it. You might think that, partying is all what it's all about, or having that pleasure, having that fun, maybe when you're younger years. And you start to realize that, no, there's more to life than this. And it almost might make you a little bit sad, thinking that you had it all made, and then you start realizing that you don't have it all made. And the same applies to working hard at a career. You might be living your life thinking, okay, if I get this promotion or I get this job, if I start a business and achieve these things, I'm going to have it made. And then when you achieve those things and you recognize that there's more to life than just that, it might make you a little bit sad. You might have this idea of it being grievous to you, just like the preacher felt this as well and realized this as well. We go into verses 18 and 19. He starts to reflect on his wealth and his accomplishments. Ecclesiastes 2, 18 to 19. I hated all the things that I toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish. Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So again, an interesting point. If you start building all of this wealth and achievement on this life, all of this physical stuff, where's it going to go after you pass away? If you look at the Old Testament and you see who Solomon left it to, his son Rehoboam, he wasn't too great with it, so he wasn't really wise with this stuff. So when we die, and when we all die, someone else is going to get all this stuff. So really, again, how meaningful is that to spend your whole life working for this wealth and achievement? We keep going to Ecclesiastes 2, verses 20 to 23. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave it all. Then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. I like in this passage where he's essentially describing a workaholic, somebody who just works all the time and focuses their whole life on working. And again, a lot of people in life, that's the meaning of life. I don't know if you remember back, I had that quote from Arnold Schwarzenegger. I didn't write it down again, so I'm not going to get it perfect. But it was all about achievement. Life is about achievement and achieving things and succeeding at things. That's a quality of that idea of workaholic, just focusing on work all the time and achieving things. And this is the ant to the extreme, working hard all the time trying to achieve things. So what do you get? He describes in here grief and pain and restless nights. And again, that's true to a point. I know a lot of people take enjoyment in their work, and they may enjoy it, but again, it still brings some stress. Whatever you're working on, if you're successful at it, you're going to have some stress in your life from as you do your job. You might have restless nights. I don't know if anybody's lost sleep over something that happened at work. I've had that happen where I've been stressed out about something that's going on at work, and then I don't sleep as well that night. That's what's being described here as well. You're really focusing so hard on these things that it's bringing you grief and restless nights. So living just to be an ant to the extreme is essentially meaningless. What does this really give you? Again, you're not going to get it all. When you die off this earth, it's going to somebody else. It's going somewhere else. So what point is all of this? But as he's talking about all this, if you go back to Ecclesiastes 2 and verse 9, he says, in all this my wisdom stayed with me. Again, he still has this God-given wisdom. Again, if you look at the life of Solomon, he did all these things. He kind of strayed off for a while and was living just this life of pleasure when he was doing this. This is what he's describing and he's living this life of pleasure in the search for knowledge and wisdom and wealth and acquisition with this wisdom that God gave him. So again, he's doing to the best of the ability that anybody could do. So then he goes on in this chapter to share what you should be doing in life. Which again, this is nice, where he talks about these meaningless things in life. These things that you can achieve are meaningless, but this is what you can do, and this is what you should be focusing on. Ecclesiastes 2, verse 24. So verse 24, it says, "A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil." So nothing better, his conclusion. This is a phrase that's going to be repeated as we keep going through the study. It's drawn 6 times total in the book, where he says there's nothing better. A person can do nothing better. And in this one he says, then to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. So one thing we have to understand, he's not promoting that idea of life of let's eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow we all die. Let's just party it up and have a good time because everything's meaningless anyway. That's not what he's promoting here. And we can see that as we continue on. Keep your bookmark in Ecclesiastes 2, but if you go to 1 Timothy chapter 6, really what the teacher, what Solomon is saying here, is to enjoy what you do and enjoy what God has blessed you with. And again, we'll see that. He expands that a little bit as we keep reading Ecclesiastes as well. But the same thought is repeated in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 17. So 1 Timothy 6 and verse 17. "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment." So again, God is going to bless us in this life. There's nothing wrong with enjoyment. We can enjoy these things that he's blessed us with. And again, that's what Solomon is talking about in here. It's okay to delight in these things to a certain extent. Again, a clarification is not delighting in all those things that are going against the word of God, like having a harem or something like that. But the whole idea of enjoying life within God's will is a good thing. It's okay to enjoy the things that God has blessed you with. If he's blessed you with physical wealth or a talent or a certain quality that is enjoyable, it's okay to enjoy that. The thing that we just have to do is ensure that we don't put all of our hope in that one thing. In this verse, it talks about putting your hope in wealth. Don't just base your whole life on wealth and gathering riches, because there's much more to life than just this. The thing that we have to remember is that we are to use these blessings for the glory of God. So if we go back to Ecclesiastes 2, we're going to look at verses 24 again, and then we're going to keep reading to verse 26. So Ecclesiastes 2, verses 24 to 26. "A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind." We cannot truly enjoy life without God. Again, if we base our full life on gathering wealth or gathering human wisdom or gathering acquisition of property or just having fun, we can't truly enjoy that without having God in our lives. We have to understand that these blessings do come from God, and using these things for his glory gives us enjoyment, knowing we're serving a greater purpose in all of this. We can use these things that we're blessed with, understanding that they came from God and using them to serve him. If you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 31. This is a New Testament verse that really sums up a lot of the thoughts that are presented in Ecclesiastes as well. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 31. It's a short verse, but very, very good. "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God." Again, that kind of sums everything up. Whatever you do, it's okay to enjoy these things. We have to make sure that we don't put all of our hope in those things, though, because all of those things are meaningless if that's all that you have. We have to do it all for the glory of God. Enjoy the things we do on this earth while we're still doing them. Have fun as long as the fun is according to God's will. We have to put some sort of limit on this. And enjoy that every moment that we enjoy, we understand that the things of this earth are temporary. We have to recognize it for what it is. Again, a lot of people focus just simply on having fun and the wealth and gaining things and human knowledge, all of that sort of stuff, when they think that that's all that there is. And there is so much more to that. So that's what Ecclesiastes is doing, is really pointing out these things are meaningless in the sense that that's all you have. It's not that much. It goes beyond that. We have to serve God as well and use these things that we're blessed with to the glory of God. Make serving God your first priority instead of the pursuit of wealth and pleasure. Make sure that you serve him and use these things that he's blessed you with to serve him. These pleasures on earth are temporary, and serving God is forever. We can see that in Ecclesiastes and throughout the New Testament as well. So the teacher, the preacher, depending on the version you have, experimented with just having fun, like the grasshopper. He also experimented with working hard, like the ant. He was both of those people. And he found that there's more to life than both. You can go beyond both of those things. Simply living life for either of these things, just having fun or just searching for wealth and working hard, is meaningless. It's a grasping for the wind. But with this understanding that these things are coming through God and from God as a blessing from him, we can enjoy the things that we have fun doing. We can enjoy the things that we work hard at. We can delight in these things. It's okay to enjoy these things. But the purpose and meaning of life is now possible knowing that all that we do and all that we have is from God and to be used for the glory of God as well. That's what we truly have to understand, and that's what's being talked about in Ecclesiastes when he's searching for acquisition of wealth and just searching for fun. It's okay to enjoy them as long as you understand that these things come from God and they're to be used for the glory of God. I'd like to offer an invitation. If you have not yet accepted the blessing that everybody in the earth has been offered in the salvation from their sins through the sacrifice of Jesus, we can show you in the scriptures how to accept that. God has laid it out for us. It's a very simple gospel message that we can show you in the scriptures how to accept. And if you're a Christian who's struggling in any way or needs help in any way, again, please make your needs known and we'll help in any way that we can.